Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world, and happy 420 Day. Now, I know there's a lot of stuff going on. We're here to celebrate 420. I know the Chauvin verdict's getting ready to be announced. We're going to try to keep on track of all of that stuff. This is a big job, bigger than any one person could handle. And so I am very happy to be joined by my friend Holly Ward. Holly, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. I'm super excited.
Well, I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. 420 cannabis, there's a lot of fun involved in it, but there's a lot of serious stuff as well. And there's a lot of places in which I think the liberty movement has led the country. 20 years ago, right? Nobody else is talking about cannabis.
Absolutely. And I think my favorite part about today's lineup, Dan, is if you look at everybody else, they've got just kind of, I think, fun bits. We have some serious legislative heavy hitters. We have some actual, practicable individuals that make their lives and movements in the cannabis industry that I'm pumped to see a whole different side of cannabis being streamed.
Well, it feels like that's a perfect segue, like we had practiced it beforehand. And so one of the things that I can do then is bring in, the heavy hitter of all heavy hitters. I don't want to spoil it. I'm just going to bring them right in. And that's the wrong screen. There it is. And so without further ado, let me welcome in Jo Jorgensen, president of the People for Liberty. Jo, welcome to our 420 event.
Yeah, I was going to say that's president to you, Dan.
It is indeed, and every time I get to say it, President Jo Jorgensen, it means a lot to me. And, you coming on board is one of the most significant things for People for Liberty. But another one is when we do events like this and we call attention to liberty issues that people don't necessarily think of. I mean, libertarians and actually a lot of people have been talking about decriminalization, legalizing marijuana for a long time. And one of the ways that we got there was by legalizing medical cannabis first. And people being able to make choices for their own healthcare, that's a critical part of liberty, right?
Right. And even beyond healthcare. And if you don't mind my just taking the ball and running with it here, because a lot of people say, oh, you're a bourbon drinker, you don't smoke pot, you must not care about this issue. First of all, this was actually the first issue that really led me down the road of libertarianism, even though I hadn't heard of the Libertarian Party yet. But when I was in high school, I attended graduation because I was in the band, and the valedictorian, and by the way, I went to a very small school, and the valedictorian really created a stir in the city. I mean, I say city, town. I mean, people were talking about it for weeks as town gossip. And what she was saying, let me just tell you the one line. It was, isn't it hypocritical how people will sit there with their martini glass telling other people that they can't smoke marijuana? And I thought, she's right. And somehow I got through the 70s, both high school and college, never having tried marijuana. But I just thought that was outrageous, because one thing I've mentioned before, Animal Farm is my favorite book. And I just think it's outrageous how some people will set up rules so they get what they want, but other people don't get what they want. And what I would say on the campaign trail is, hey, I get my drug of choice. I get bourbon. Why shouldn't they have their drug of choice? And hypocrisy is just one thing that really gets me when, again, we've got lawmakers with a drink in their hand saying, nope, we can't let other people smoke marijuana. So even forget the medical issue, which, yes, is important. Just on a personal level, I don't see lawmakers drinking bourbon or gin or vodka for health reasons. They don't have to justify it. They don't have to legalize their drug of choice by pretending to use it for medical reasons. So why are they making it so hard for the cannabis industry to put forth their drug? It's just, it's outrageous. It's outrageous.
That leads me to one of my favorite stories, that Winston Churchill was in the United States during Prohibition, and knowing that we had prohibition in place, he came with a prescription from a doctor for a drink every evening at 8 p.m. for medicinal purposes for his nerves, which is one of those classic stories. One of the important things, though, and I agree with you, it's autonomy, it's about choice. We put out a poll, the People for Liberty did, among our, I don't know how many groups we have right now on Facebook, saying, will legal or decriminalized marijuana affect your move decision when the next time you move? And 60% of people said, no, not really. 25% of people said yes. 14% responded, am I being detained? But we also broke it up by our various Facebook groups. And among people with disabilities for liberty, 100% said that legalizing cannabis would affect where they were going to move, that they would never move to a state where it wasn't. And I thought that was an astonishing thing, that it's that overwhelming. And this is the problem, of course, and this is the problem that we recognize with the liberty issue, is that if you're a person whose voice isn't necessarily amplified, go ahead. You're going there already.
And I was going to say, it's just government. I just can't say enough bad about it. We've got people right now who choose a house or choose a neighborhood or sometimes even a state, because they want their child to get a good education, because they want a good school. And now we're having people having to move to states for medicine. It's obscene. And it just shows how government just has such a grip. And again, even getting back to the hypocrisy, both Democrats and Republicans, we can point to Joe Biden, how even the things that Hunter Biden has admitted to, it should have thrown him in jail for the very laws that Joe Biden helped pass, just like with Jeb Bush and his daughter, Noelle, I believe, who, when she was caught with marijuana, I believe it was marijuana, the family said, oh, personal matter. Well, how come it's not a personal matter for the rest of us? How come the rest of us have to move to different states? But you guys, the pigs sitting around the dining room table, the kitchen table playing cards, you get to do whatever you want in whatever state you want. Oh, and by the way, because you're paid way too much for your so-called public service, you get to send your kids to a public school that you don't have to sit there and be limited by the neighborhood.
That brings up a great point. Prior to the three presidents before Donald Trump, all admitted that they had smoked marijuana. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing to think about is that, if Bill Clinton had been busted with a joint, smooth talking Bill Clinton, it would have been no problem, right? He's at Yale, all these things about it. If George Bush Jr. had been caught with a joint, his father would have gotten out of it. I mean, George Bush Jr. famously went into treatment for drugs many times. If Barack Obama had been caught with a joint, he probably would never have been president, because there's also there's a lack of equality in how drug laws are enforced. And we can see those things across the country.
And not just whether you're president or not, and not just by race, but socioeconomic issues. For instance, Barack Obama wasn't an inner city Black kid. He went to what I've heard is a private high school in Hawaii, in which, okay, you get to live under a different set of rules. And why is that? And again, we hear how government is trying to be so compassionate. Why is it so compassionate that if you don't have money, that if you're the wrong race, that you have to live under a different set of guidelines than everybody else?
Yeah, and that's an outstanding point. So one of the other benefits of the cannabis industry rising up right now is that we are creating entrepreneurs. We are creating small business owners through this thing. And there's a great connection between being a small business owner and wanting more liberty and less government, right?
Yep.
Can you talk to us about some of the lessons that you learned about liberty when you were a small business owner?
Well, that the government doesn't give you many, and that you have to file endless forms. And at the risk of repeating myself, I talked when I was the VP candidate. I talked to one owner who owned a deli who said that OSHA had a law that said he could never have the floor behind his counter wet, whilst the health department said he was required to wash the floor once a day or whatever. So either way, you were breaking laws. Even as an American citizen, you might be breaking laws that you don't realize. But as a business owner, there are so many more laws that you can break. And, you talk about barriers to entry, and we've got so many, we hear these government bureaucrats saying, well, we want to, encourage minority-owned businesses. We want to encourage people to start their own businesses. Well, you sure don't act like it, because you've got all of these laws where you almost have to already have money in order to afford the lawyer, in order to be able to incorporate, in order to do all these other things just to navigate the scenery.
Those are all really good examples. And I think they're things that people don't realize until they get in front of that sort of issue. And so, we are in creating another aspect of our economy, right? The weed economy. We're creating opportunities for people to go out there and to learn the best thing about capitalism. And so that's one of the things that I like to talk about too. A lot of people are like, oh, there's this rise in terms of some kids who are excited about socialism or other aspects of a shared economy. But when I talk to them about cannabis, and I say, the cannabis market that exists now is very capitalistic, and I think it provides. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in fact, I know I mentioned the story to you earlier where my husband and I were walking in a not very nice part of town for one reason or another. And we had somebody across the street come running up to us and, hey, talking to us. And I remember I said to the guy, oh, we're fine. That's okay. And the guy goes, okay, we'll see you. And my husband turned to me and said, what was that all about? Do you know him? We've never been in this neighborhood before. Who was that? And I said, well, judging by the neighborhood, I would say that this might be a place where people go to buy drugs. Because unfortunately, as Americans, we can't go to a safe place like a liquor store. So we have to go to certain neighborhoods. And I said, he was just being a great capitalist. He was being a good business person, wanting to give us good customer service. And so he was offering to, he probably figured, why else were we there? And he was going to, run across the street and give us really good customer service. So even the government can't keep people from doing what they would do if they were free, which is to provide a good or a service to somebody else, and to do it in a way where there's competition, where they're trying to offer better service than other people.
That's an outstanding point. And you talk about this because it used to be, right, exactly, you would have to go to neighborhoods, or you had a dealer, somebody who could supply you with cannabis or other drugs. In the states where cannabis has become legal, one of the other consequences is that we've seen a tremendous drop in arrest rates, because if there's not a cause for it, and so close to me in Baltimore last year, when the prisons were being overcrowded and they were really worried about COVID, the state attorney decided, we're not going to prosecute low-level crimes, including minor possession, prostitution, crimes. Right, exactly. Right. What they consider crimes. Yeah, exactly right. And shockingly to them, when they stopped arresting these people who weren't really committing crimes, only doing what they did, the crime rate hasn't risen. And so that's another thing that we're talking about, right? Is that ending this non-violent crime is actually going to be great for us.
Oh, just like Al Capone, same thing. And the thing that I mentioned pretty much every stop on the campaign trail was, I would ask people, When is the last time you heard of a liquor store owner going up and down the halls of a high school trying to push vodka on kids? Or when's the last time you heard of a bourbon addict breaking into houses in order to support a bourbon habit? You don't, because those are legal. So you don't have that extra illicit profit built in to reward people for doing dangerous things. And so the irony is they've got laws that they say is supposed to help us. It's supposed to protect our children. It's supposed to keep drugs out of the hands of people. And it does the opposite. In fact, now, and I'm not going to be able to sit through the whole show because actually today is a teaching day for me, but I'm sure you'll have people who know more about this than I. My understanding is that where marijuana is legal, it's actually harder to get it. And I know that for years, high school kids have said, oh yeah, it's a lot harder to get alcohol than it is marijuana in the school and other types of drugs. Well, yeah, because if you're selling it legally, it's not worth that small profit to sell liquor to kids. But if you've got a huge profit built into it, then it is worth it.
You know, Joe, it's like you read our segue script and you knew exactly what we're going to be talking about next, because our next guest is trying to open a cannabis store right now, and he's going to be able to talk about all of those issues. So that's a wonderful preview. We are appreciative of the fact that this is a teaching day for you, and you've got some kids who are depending on you for a good education. And I, for one, am happy that there's a professor like you out there for them. So thanks so much for coming on the show. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Me too. See you, Dan.
Bye, Joe. And I managed to do it right. So it's you and me, Holly. Thanks again, Joe. That was awesome, right?
I love hearing Dr. Joe speak from the heart, Dan. Like I don't know, she just touches a part of me where I just want to, yes, how are you not president?
Right.
She's so energetic.
I do want to correct something, though. I said that our next guest was marijuana entrepreneur Warren Lynch, but our next guest is actually Peachtree Normal activist Laura Williams. And I don't think I need to say anything else. I mean, so a friend of mine turned me on to Laura's writing, some of the critical work that she's been doing in the Liberty Place for a long time. And I'm just pleased as punch. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so exciting. The inaugural podcast.
The inaugural podcast. Well, so first of all, I can't believe that phrase has never been used before. We were in a meeting, Holly said it, and I'm like, yeah, that's what we're going with from now on. But it's also one of those things that, talk about the fact, I'm old enough that, for me, podcast is still like, this new thing. And now we combine it with the fact that we're talking about legalized cannabis, and it's amazing how fast things are going. And I'm guessing for you in a normal group. So first of all, why don't you explain normal for the people who aren't listening doesn't mean the same as everything else. Normal is an acronym.
Right. Normal is an acronym. Almost none of us are, in fact, normal in the traditional sense. But Normal is the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. So that group has been active since the early 70s. And then there are state chapters, just like with lots of national organizations, sometimes several per state, especially in big states, who are working on the ground for the kind of activism that we would love to see happen at the federal level, but has been happening state by state in sort of a grand prohibition nullification program.
Interesting. And so in that space, the Normal group, you said they've been going since the 70s, they've seen the change, right? They've seen the tide turned. And I'm wondering for you, how long have you been involved in your local Normal group? How long have you been involved in, the effort to change marijuana laws?
About 5 years. So I was a latecomer to the concept of cannabis. I grew up with drug abuse resistance education, the DARE program.
Sure.
And it worked on me. I was sold. I thought it was a dangerous narcotic akin to crack, and have only pretty recently come to this new understanding of cannabis as a medicine, cannabis as a safer alternative to pain relief, to some of the recreational drugs that people enjoy, including Dr. Jorgensen's bourbon. It's far safer than alcohol. And this is something that we want people to have access to and to talk about openly.
You know, one of the things, so Massachusetts, where I lived until recently in 2016, legalized recreational. And some of the people who were the strongest testimony about it were police officers who were making public commercials saying, listen, I go on domestic calls all the time. And if you ask any officer, would you rather go to a domestic call where alcohol is involved or where cannabis is involved? There's no competition. And, you know, that's a really important thing, is that these changing of the laws, it's not just about people getting high. It's about a lot more than that, right?
Right. It is about how the money and power have been distributed over the last 100 years. You'll notice that even though our organization includes the term marijuana, we do try to say cannabis. It's the same plant, of course, and you'll sometimes hear people separate out industrial hemp, but there is no difference. It's all the same plant. It's just how it's cultivated, different strains, different breeds. But we try to use the term cannabis because marijuana was part of a disinformation campaign by federal regulators to get people to ban something that most Americans were already familiar with and, in fact, had in their own medicine cabinets. Cannabis was used for the treatment of lots of everyday maladies. It was used as a remedy. Now, heroin was also being used as an over-the-counter remedy at the time. That's not necessarily exonerating it as a safe product.
Sure.
But it was very familiar. And in order to convince people to ban it, it needed to be associated with something that people feared, which at that era was Mexican immigration. So by using this scary word marijuana to otherize the plant, they managed to push it through with, in fact, many people, including people who voted for it, not realizing that the bill included cannabis because they were unfamiliar with this smokable plant.
So
go ahead, Holly.
Sorry, you brought up a great point in that when we talk about cannabis, it's usually framed in a very social situation. And you identify that cannabis is used in so many different avenues and approaches, medicinal uses, people that have ailments. And I'd love to hear what your experience is when you interact with legislatures and if they approach cannabis as social when they work with you guys, or if they're willing to listen to the other benefits of cannabis.
The interesting thing is, I think at the legislative levels, often the benefits are known and they have seen the overdose rates go down when cannabis becomes available in states. Opiate overdoses go way down. Alcohol use actually goes down, the number of drinks consumed. So it's not that people switch, but they drink less overall. And of course, the lobbying groups that are invested in those products that will be used less if cannabis is available as an alternative do have powerful hooks in each of our state legislatures and in Washington. So we're often not fighting against misinformation as much as I thought we might be. It is vested interests. People increasingly know that cannabis is at least no more harmful than alcohol.
Dan, you're muted.
Can't hear you, Dan.
Sorry, that's one of the classic things. Normally it's a drink. I've got my water bottle here. I'm drinking for talking while muted. Okay. When you talk about the fact that there is this disinformation out there, there's a term that I've used a lot called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that there are, I know for a fact that there are professionals who specialize in FUD. And we've seen that fighting against a lot of legalization laws, right? There are corporate powers and other industries that have really worked hard against legalizing cannabis, right?
Absolutely. So at the top of the spending against any particular legalization effort in any city or state, you will see police unions. So we do increasingly see officers individual officers who want to talk about this is not a good use of our resources, or this is not as dangerous as we were led to believe. But the unions overall count on some of that revenue. It's an easy transfer of wealth and funding and budgets between levels of government through these drug task force. You also see, of course, the beer and liquor lobby. They don't want this safer alternative competition. They've managed to keep it off the market so far, and they are not looking to have public health advocates look in their direction instead of at cannabis. Corrections unions, for every person who's arrested for cannabis, you have a low-risk criminal who will be available to fill a corrections bed. Now, whether that's a private prison, if we can call it that. I mean, they're always sent there by government guns and held there by government guns, so it's nominally private. But there's an incentive in private incarceration and in public incarceration unions to keep these not very risky offenders in incarcerated situations. Pharma, of course, you will see come out against. They know that when people have natural alternatives, including alternatives they can grow themselves, that they consume fewer patented pills. And pharma is not interested in the competition, understandably. I get why that matches up with their needs and their priorities, but they should not be our national priorities. And then federal employees often come out against this for a number of reasons, most of which are to do with funding and job security. You will always see the same people lined up against any effort to legalize.
You know, that's one of the fascinating things, is that in this sort of cabal, it's the same story that we've always been seeing: follow the money, right?
Yeah.
The people who have a vested interest in keeping it illegal, they're fighting and fighting and fighting. But at least to me, it feels like the tide has turned. One of my favorite quotes about this was, cannabis won more states than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Is there anything that you look at and you say, this is where we changed? This is where the country said, okay, we're ready to go with this?
I don't know that I've been paying attention long enough in the history to have had that personal moment, right? I can tell you when I turned, but national opinion has absolutely shifted. It is something like 92% of Americans now say cannabis should be legal to use in at least some circumstances. If we are, as a divided country, united on anything, it is that there are legitimate uses for cannabis.
And I think it's interesting that, you know, with the states that have legalized, and not my home state of Maryland, and what's it like in Georgia for you?
There is absolutely no legal use in Georgia at all. We do, the state does issue medical cannabis cards, oil cards for low THC only. And they have issued something and charged people for something like 20,000 of them, and it's still illegal to buy. It's illegal to have. Yeah. It's illegal to bring over state lines. So you're protected if you use it, but you can't get it.
And, you know, Dan, that really goes to show not just follow the money, but how deep that money goes. Laura, you said you've been doing this for 5 years and you're still up against that wall. How can people in Georgia help?
Well, we would love to have you. We have a 3-prong campaign in Georgia right now, none of which relies on our staunchly anti-cannabis legislature. So that's one of my favorite things about NORML right now, is that we're looking at other approaches that don't require us to go to a state house and beg people to understand us. One of the things is encouraging people not to take a plea. So the Georgia law is for simple possession. It's a $1,000 fine and up to a year in prison. That is a big hurdle to ask people to risk at trial. So people plead out to very small fines and very small probation. And so it continues to be profitable for these jurisdictions to fine people $1,000. And if we can convince people not to take a plea, to go all the way to trial, we can make it very expensive to prosecute, especially in these small towns and counties. And I would love to see the sheriffs and the DAs go back to their taxpayers and say, we need to raise your taxes. We need more money to prosecute low-level cannabis offenders, and see what their voters say back to them.
Well, and that's especially pertinent because one of the things that taking cannabis away is that it prevents a lot of civil asset forfeiture, which has been funding police departments. So for people who aren't familiar with how the laws work right now, can you talk about the correlation between civil asset forfeiture and drug laws that allow an officer to say, I think I smell marijuana?
Okay, so you've identified two different problems there, overlapping problems. One is that the odor of marijuana can be used to suspend the Fourth Amendment. So you can lose your right to refuse an unjust search or seizure simply because an officer claims to smell cannabis. Now, that's been overturned in a number of states, including a few states where cannabis is still completely illegal. That has been removed as a reason to generate probable cause. But that's problem number one, is it puts people in more contact with police. And then, of course, anything that can be construed as having been used in the commission of a quote unquote cannabis crime is subject to seizure by a local police department or by a state task force that then splits revenue with federal and local colleagues.
So let me
if
get this
your
straight.
grandson is selling cannabis out of your house, you can lose your house. We have seen that happen. Houses seized, cars seized, and it's almost impossible to get that back because your property is charged with a crime rather than the person being charged with a crime who then has rights and can appeal that. It's extremely difficult to get your property back once it's been seized.
And this is lucrative for police departments, right?
Extremely lucrative for police departments.
So,
and the budgets in many cases depend on these seizures. They are supplemented to such an extent that the police department would not be able to run without asset forfeiture.
so once again, it's a follow the money scenario. So given this scenario and Georgia having medical sort of, but no real way to take advantage or anything like that, what's the nearest state that you could go to purchase recreational marijuana? If you know, I'm not saying that you would, but
if I were to want to obtain marijuana for adult use, I believe Illinois is probably the closest. Just something like 8 hours.
Are you?
I could be wrong. We've had a lot of progress in the last 6 months, and it is not something that I've done, but it is doable.
Well,
wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. Virginia, just passed. We have a representative from Virginia Normal on later, where you can grow at home, but they don't have commercial sales yet. And New Jersey passed, but it's going to be like 2 years before they can sell. I'm, spoiled having lived in Massachusetts where, it was just, it was the perfect thing. We actually have another guest on from Massachusetts who's going to be talking about a little bit about Massachusetts next. But when we had recreational, the amazing thing about it was that the first week, the stores were all backed up. People were lined up to go there. But capitalism, right? The lines don't last. People learn how to service. And that's one of the other amazing things about this is that as it goes mainstream, it just becomes agriculture, which then becomes a straightforward thing, except that in some ways, it's not just agriculture. Like I could grow tomatoes in Massachusetts and sell them. I could grow cannabis in Massachusetts, but I couldn't sell it. Is that one of the things that Normal is looking at, is how the laws that are implemented are not as completely free as they could be?
Absolutely. And we would really like to see something more like decriminalization and removal of prohibition rather than these regulation intensive, often tax intensive legalization commercial schemes that allow for a limited number of dispensaries and a limited number of producers, all of which is a way of limiting the market, the legal market. And as we've seen in Canada, and in some of the states that have legalized it, that will leave the majority of cannabis sales in the black market, which means that people who can't afford the 25, 30, 40% markup that comes with buying through these regulatory structures will continue to be criminalized because the product that they're buying is not technically legal, even though cannabis itself has been legalized. We're also picking up best practices from states as we go. There are things we know that we didn't know before to be aware of. One of those is there probably is some space for regulation in terms of testing. So all Georgia is worried about is, does it have enough THC to alter your mind? But they are not paying attention to, say, heavy metals or molds or,
Right.
micro things that could really be quite harmful even when the plant itself is not. And when you're growing in unregulated spaces, you're more likely to get that, and there aren't the informal or formal structures to test cannabis for that. We also want to,
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
we also want to make sure that future bills to address this problem include expungement of previous records so that there are not still people serving sentences for something that other people are now doing legally and in many cases making a living from and winning prizes for while other people are still sitting in cells. We want home grow. We want Second Amendment protections so that this doesn't become a backdoor to seizure of weapons or inability to own weapons. We want to keep an eye on the tax rates, both local, state, and if there is a federal, the MORE Act that got a brief flash of symbolism last fall would have added a significant percentage onto the already high state taxes.
And you raise an amazing point. One of the things in Maryland is that if I were to go get my medical card, I would not be able to, if I were to have a concealed carry permit, I would not be able to have a concealed carry permit anymore, which is, it's the oddest thing of all.
We shouldn't be pitting one liberty against another here.
Right, exactly. Because they're trying to divide us. So Laura Williams, Peachtree Normal, thank you so much. People want to find out more. Peachtree Normal, now NORML, like we're scrolling at the bottom, normal.org is where they find out how to get involved. And Georgia, how close are you? If you had to make a guess, how close are you to recreational?
4 years, I would say.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good. So I'm penciling it in right now. The 4th annual 420 will be taping in Atlanta. You guys will come down with us. It'll be awesome.
All right. I really hope it works out that way, but you're welcome anytime. Come help us out if we're still struggling in 4 years.
Easy to do. I love Athens. It's like my favorite place in the world to go, one of my favorite places in the world to go. So I'm happy to get down to the Atlanta area. Thank you so much, Laura. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. PeachtreeNormal.org.
PeachtreeNormal.org. We're going to leave it scrolling a little longer. And all right. So that was great. It's these organizations that have been fighting for our rights, for all the rights. And it's such a comprehensive fight because it's not just getting high. It's not just possession. It's not just civil asset forfeiture. It's not just small businesses. It's all these different things. And Normal's been there since the beginning.
Yep, absolutely. And I love that Normal connects everything too. Normal makes sure that we're pulling in all of the loose ends. They really are a broad organization in terms of making sure they dot all their I's and cross all the T's. I think that's so important.
It is. And, speaking of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, as cannabis becomes mainstream, it does a lot of mainstream, I don't want to say normal business procedures, but there's a lot of stuff that if you're a small business owner, you worry about. And, one of the biggest ones is insurance. And our next guest, Michael DeNault. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
So Michael is at Charles River Insurance, and you are an expert in cannabis insurance.
Well, I don't want to flatter myself. You don't have to put it that way.
Okay.
By time standards, yeah, I guess you could say Charles River as a whole is kind of in the expert realm. I mean, you being from Massachusetts, very well the legal market has been open now for about 3 years. And we've been in that market the entire time. So, so this is my dog Zeppelin. He wanted to join us today for the
what's up, Zeppelin?
Yeah. So
totally, dogs are welcome at all 420 celebrations.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You talk about the fact that the market in Massachusetts is pretty mature. How long after legalizing recreational did people start to realize that there's a need for insurance in the industry?
Well, insurance is the DNA of every single business in the entire world. It talks about your sales, your payroll, what exposures you have, and what your risks are. So cannabis insurance kind of is geared towards the same type of style for any other non-cannabis business. You see these small businesses open up, they have employees, they have sales, they have product, and they're doing build outs on these very big buildings. So we're treating the cannabis industry just like any other industry. The toughest part for us was to actually find a carrier that would accept the risk from these cannabis businesses that we're opening. Thankfully, we were able to partner with a great carrier, Safe Herb. It had to rock some of their swag today. Good shout out to Kramer and Scott and Eric for helping us make this happen. They've been partners with us for the last 3 years trying to make this whole thing happen. And part of the reason we're so keen on them is because they really focus, and we've adopted this as well at Charles River, but their entire program focuses on solutions first. And what that means is an insurance policy, a fire extinguisher, and sprinkler systems will all protect you after a loss happens. What are you doing before a loss happens? What are you doing on a pre-loss basis? That's the ideal that we are bringing to the table with the cannabis industry. And we're really finding success because there's so many new businesses that we can work this out on. Questions, go ahead.
I want to stop you on a quick technical thing. Can you
Sure.
explain briefly the difference, what a carrier means to an insurance?
Sure. Yeah. So Charles River Insurance is an independent insurance agency. We're a brokerage, meaning we, as an agency, represent over 40 different carriers. An insurance carrier would be one of your the cover holders for your policy. They would be a Liberty Mutual, a Geico, a Progressive.
Got it.
Ones you see on any of the major TV channels, those are the carriers.
Got you. And so those are people that are employing, and I don't want to get too mathy in here, but they're employing actuarials who are looking at what the risk is and then assessing what is the rate so that the risk is shared between the people who are buying insurance.
Exactly right. Yeah, the actuaries, the underwriters, the people who actually come up with the ideas to cover certain risks and certain perils.
So let's talk about some of the basic elements of the industry. Agriculture, right? The growers. Do you guys offer insurance for people who are growing?
So funny enough, myself and my team actually just, I'm smiling because this is pretty exciting stuff here, but we actually just released the first known outdoor crop coverage for outdoor cultivators in the United States, including both the recreational and medical cannabis markets, as well as the hemp and CBD market. Yeah, so this is something where it's not your typical insurance. It's something called parametric insurance. What this does and how it differentiates from a typical insurance policy is typically if there's an insurance claim, if there's a fire on your house, not to be morbid, but typically there'll be a claims adjuster that comes out, assesses the damage, and then pays you out based on what your damage is. Parametric insurance runs a little differently. For our outdoor crop coverage, basically what it is it measures weather patterns. Let's say there's a huge hailstorm that comes down and damages some of your plants. The claim that you put in won't be for the amount of damage to your plants, but by the size of the hail. It's the impact that the weather itself has, and the payout is almost instantaneous.
Interesting. And that obviously makes it a lot easier for a grower to get into the business because they don't have to worry about one bad weather event knocking them out entirely out of the business.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that the crop is their entire supply chain. That's why they're in the business. So the faster we can pay them out to either replace the crop or manage to stay afloat for long enough so they can replace everything that they need, that's why we did that. That's why we created this product. on the flip side, we have there's the indoor crop coverage is something that's becoming a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more standard. We have been offering that for the full 3 years that Massachusetts has been legal. We're actually able to operate in all 50 states, which is really, really great. We're a 2-agency operation here in Massachusetts, but we have such a far reach. Indoor crop coverage, as you know, is a very controlled environment. That's an underwriter's dream, is to have a controlled environment.
Right, because you don't have to worry about animals getting in, no pests, anything like that. But it's probably reflected in the rates as well. Now,
exactly.
One of the things that happens a lot in insurance in a lot of industries is that insurance actually sets some quality control rules about what's going on. Is that true for cannabis insurance as well?
Absolutely. And we've actually taken it a step further, and we've actually introduced tangible products that will prevent known losses from happening. So we've started partnering with a few different companies. I won't name any names right now, but there's some. You can check us out at watersinsurancenetwork.com for a list of the different solutions that we have there. But it's helping growers prevent mold losses and other types of known indoor losses due to HVAC and air quality control.
That's awesome, because we were just talking with the normal people saying, we would want to have a way to be sure that moldy products weren't shipped like that. But in fact, the private market has a solution to that, right?
They're exactly right. There's one thing that my boss told me when I first started in this job and in this industry, and he told me, you will be selling solutions first, and if you ever sell a policy first, you'll be fired. And here I am today. So awesome. Trying to introduce these types of solutions so people don't have to use their insurance policy. The last thing I want you to do as a client of mine is to use your insurance. The best thing I can do is be a risk manager and manage those certain risks that are in your particular business. That levels us up a little bit.
So let's talk about sort of the insurance industry as a whole in terms of that risk management thing, and that a lot of what insurance companies do is they help companies to make sure that they are being as safe as possible. And that's not just cannabis, right? It's across the board.
Absolutely. Yeah, it should be so here's the key word. It should be like that for every industry. It's not.
Right.
But we've seen that with COVID, especially. There's been a lot of different cases where a lot of businesses have tried to use insurance for different reasons, and they've been rejected coverage. That's because the carriers haven't done their due diligence with risk management. We're trying to take a different approach from a lower level as an independent agency. And hopefully we're going to try and make a systemic change, not just a policy by policy change. And I think that kind of fits into the whole scheme of what People for Liberty is for, is making changes that are kind of known nationwide and affect things moving forward for the future.
I see Holly nodding.
Yes, absolutely. And so, Michael, I'll be honest, I had no idea that this insurance for marijuana even existed before we heard about your company and researching for the podcast. And my first question was, is this nationwide? And then when we looked into the Charles River Insurance, it says you guys do nationwide. I'd love to hear about any of your experiences outside of Massachusetts, and if you're seeing a diverse brand of customers, or how are you feeling this as a industry nationwide based in Massachusetts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. And, I have a lot of clients right now that are out in Colorado. It's a known state just for being legal for one of the longest times next to California. But I also have a handful of clients that are down in Texas and Florida too, both on the CBD and hemp side and the medical side. So it's interesting to see the different regulations that are down there. Every state's different with their insurance requirements. Just looking at some of my quick notes here, Florida doesn't require the same as Massachusetts does. Florida actually has no insurance requirements right now. And if you actually look at every single state that has medical or recreational legalization, there's next to no insurance requirements. Massachusetts has some of the tightest insurance requirements, and they're actually some of the biggest pieces of their overall policy. So when you think about kind of the breakdown of what people are paying for, in Massachusetts anyways, it's based on the state requirements. But in any other state, Colorado, Florida, even Texas, there's no insurance requirements. So we have to really do our due diligence with advising these clients on what their risks are, what their peril are, and what we need to protect them on.
That is amazing. And the idea that for me as a consumer, one of the things that I can do is I can know if there's an insurance provider behind it, and there could be a store or a sign on the brand insured by Charles River. And for me, that's a quality assurance thing that I can ignore or approve of, something like that. It's a great private solution to, I will tell a little story. When I was in high school and I bought cannabis, and it was enough that it was going to be weighed beforehand. And as it turns out, somebody had sprayed it with sugar water and then let it dry so that the sugar added to the weight of the cannabis. I wouldn't have had to worry about that if there was an insurance policy going on. So that sort of private solution to potential problems, I think, is a huge deal.
I totally agree. And, one of the things I actually wanted to touch on that Laura mentioned, she was talking about home grows. And that's something where I've had a million questions about home grows and home insurance covering cannabis operations. I've talked to the executives at some of these major insurance carriers, and they want nothing to do with cannabis. They don't want businesses. They don't want houses. They don't want cars.
Wow.
A lot of the standard insurance market is not ready to take on cannabis. The carriers we work with, and SafeHerb included, they're all specialty markets. They take on high risk type of clients. Cannabis is included in that. Another example would be excavation or crane operation, things that are just kind of out of the ordinary. So when you're talking about home insurance and home grows, let's say you have a small electrical fire or a leak in your home grow system and you go to file a home insurance claim, that claims adjuster is going to ask why you had a loss. And if they find out it's from cannabis, even with it being legal home grow in all these different states, you probably will not get a payout because it's cannabis. So, that's a little tidbit I get asked about all the time. But that's the long and short answer is there's no coverage for home grows right now.
Michael, you said something that you said that they're not ready for it. And is it that they're not ready or that they're not willing? Do you find there's still a stigma about this in your line of work?
Absolutely. When people talk about insurance, the stigma around insurance is a lot of 50 to 60-year-old guys that go play golf all the time. So when you're talking about cannabis, those guys are not particularly fond of cannabis. So it's a huge reputational risk, not just for the producers that are selling this stuff, but it's also for the executives of the company that are owning these companies and managing what is coming in and what's going out.
But then in the free market, it tends to take care of itself. If you were to make a rough guess, what is the rough size of investment right now in cannabis insurance? All the policies written right now, just a rough guess.
Oh God.
Billions?
I can say in Massachusetts alone, there's gotta be close to, 750 million to $1 billion in insurance alone.
Wow.
No, yeah. $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, unless you're the federal government.
That's just Massachusetts, by the way. So just to give you an idea of the national market.
All right. Well, Michael, I think we're going to have you back because this is a bigger topic than the 15 minutes that we're going to do that we had allocated for this. And for sure, Zeppelin is coming back as well. There are a lot of comments. He's a huge hit. Hey, Zepp, what's up?
No,
we like that on the podcast.
Yep. So let's just say it again: Charles River Insurance / Cannabis Insurance, Massachusetts. But probably the easiest thing to do if people can't remember to type that is search Cannabis Insurance, Charles River, and you guys pop up number one. I did that, and that's all I know.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and Zeppelin, thanks you too. And we'll definitely have to schedule another one of these, and I'll bring my team in, and we can really get into the weeds.
I think that would be great because I think this is a terrible pun, but yeah,
too easy. It's too easy.
It's too easy. All right. Thanks again, Michael. All right, so now we're going to break into our 420 podcast with a little bit of breaking news. We're going to bring in our next guest though to help us with it. So, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
How you doing?
We're doing pretty good. It's a 420 kind of day, and it just got more so because we heard that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all accounts.
Yes. Actually, I want to say hi to Holly again.
Hey, Tom.
Helped with my 2020 campaign.
I did.
It's it's good to know good activists, and Holly's among the best. So I'll open this up to you guys first. Thoughts on the verdict?
To me, it was expected. With everything going on, all of the spotlight on the case, and everything that happened in the last year, I would be surprised and almost afraid if they came back differently, because if he got a not guilty on all counts, an awful lot of people would be upset, and I think we've been seeing what happens.
Well, so Tom, I think we saw that with the Breonna Taylor case when it didn't come back with the anticipated verdict. And I hope, Dan, that this serves as a catalyst to have a real conversation about qualified immunity. I think we really need to start talking about qualified immunity that law enforcement has and how it translates to the public. And the fact that we have a one-off instance where we do have some accountability. I don't want the reform in liberty and criminal justice to reform to stop here. I think really making sure that we're working towards qualified immunity and using this as a landmark case is a great way forward.
Right. And, one of the things that alarmed me a little bit about this was that in many ways, it seemed like what the police were doing were trying to find a way to protect themselves from this case, but not have to change anything. Yeah. When we know there has to be systemic change. Go ahead, Thomas.
I saw in the deliberations, they were arguing that his health conditions and drug problems were reasons why he should be found not guilty. And I have to completely disagree with that. As a disabilities advocate, I see articles where a 12-year-old gets slammed on the hood of a cruiser by a cop, or a limbless teenager gets held in a chokehold in CPS living quarters. That there is absolutely no reason for a pre-existing health condition, whether you can see it or not, to justify a death or an injury. A police officer should be aware that these things exist and should treat all human beings as if their lives truly do matter. And let's face it, putting your knee on somebody's neck for over 9 minutes is not that.
Yep, absolutely. I definitely get concerned when I hear the excuses for why it shouldn't happen versus we're not talking about the knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes. We're not talking about the 3 other officers that stood by. We're not talking about listening to someone say they can't breathe. There's more to it than just an individual. It's a complete power of law enforcement. And, I want to be very clear that I don't think that all law enforcement is bad. I think there are so many that are peace officers that really do serve to exist to have an act of public service, but the line between the two has gotten so muddied.
I do have friends who are police officers, and they don't talk about it much, but in the right situation, which usually involves a little bit of whiskey or something to that effect, the first thing they complain about is not being able to call out cops they work with who are doing bad things. And that's largely over police unions, qualified immunity, the brotherhood effect. Police need to be able to point out when one of their coworkers is doing something bad. And when it comes to justifying the knee on his neck for restraining him, as you pointed out, there were multiple officers. I think they're all equipped with handcuffs. I don't think 9 minutes of a man's knee on your neck is necessary to restrain someone.
Yeah, and the fact that they all sat around. There is an interesting thing going on in Buffalo right now. In Buffalo, there was a police officer who was fired because she came across an officer choking a suspect who was in handcuffs already. And she's like, "You're going to kill him. You're going to kill him. You need to stop. He's handcuffed. What are you doing?" And the guy wouldn't stop. He doubled down on the chokehold. and she tackled him. Now, you probably are familiar with this because you're a New York resident and you ran for state rep in New York. But so she tackled him to stop him from killing this person in custody, and she was fired. Protection for police officers who are actually doing their job needs to be codified.
And you know, there's something that most people who tend to defend the police officers a little too much or across the board, you know, this is what they fail to realize. Once a police officer has stopped you, let alone if they're restraining you physically, they have decided that your life and your well-being is their own responsibility. That police officer is now responsible for you and your well-being.
All right. I think that we've hit this. I think we're all generally agreed that this is the verdict that we are hoping for. I know a lot of people tuned into this because it's 420 and it's PotCast, and we apologize for, to use the vernacular, harshing your mellow. However, sorry.
Well, you know, it's a win. It's a win. That's a positive verdict for the people.
It is a positive verdict.
I don't think it's harshing any mellow.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And I'm glad that we noted this moment of, I don't want to say triumph, but of things getting better. This is the result.
This is a huge catalyst, and I think
Right.
this can really serve for serious reform. And it shows that the voice of the people matters. It shows that people need to start listening to the public. It
Yep.
shows the power of the public and the power of the people. And I do believe that this is a catalyst for government and governmental agencies to really start listening to people with what we have to say.
100%. And, you know, I think power to the people is a great way to put it. And
it is absolutely up to the people to hold not only our elected officials, but our public servants of all kinds accountable for their actions and behavior.
so to that end, you know, we talk about power to the people. One of the things that gives the people a lot of power is information. And Thomas, your organization, Nug of Knowledge, you guys are sponsoring this event. Can you tell us a little bit about this? And then I know we have a clip for you guys to play. Because you guys are rock stars.
Not my organization. I am volunteering for Dan Berman's organization. I'm a volunteer ever because, well, the government doesn't let me have a job and stay alive. But I was watching earlier, and I really appreciate Laura and everything she said, and the proliferation of the use of cannabis over marijuana or hemp is very, very important. If you look up the definition of hemp, it is defined as cannabis bred and grown for the sake of fiber to, say, make rope or other industrial products. But our government has dissuaded us from that. I'm going to hold up two objects here. This one, government says is hemp because it's low in THC. Does that look like you could make rope out of it?
I'm not a rope expert, but I'm going to say maybe.
Not really. No, it doesn't have any fibers.
Okay.
Whereas this one is technically black market cannabis with 35% or better THC. They look exactly the same, and there's no difference except for that THC level. And that's just kind of ridiculous. And I want to point that out. One specific instance I'm aware of that happened in New York. We had legalized, although made it expensive, hemp production and CBD products from that hemp. And I'm aware of a local farmer who had to burn their entire crop. They weren't allowed to plow it back under the field so they had a better field the next year. They weren't allowed to sell it as cattle feed. They weren't allowed to turn it into rope. They had to turn their crop of CBD hemp, supposedly hemp, they had to burn it because it came just a little bit over that allowable percentage, and it tested one small part of the crop, whole field up in smoke.
Would it have been okay to burn it in like a plastic shaped thing with a little cup holder on the end? Holly sees where I'm going with that. So probably not. So to that end, you guys actually have a video. Let me pop this in. Dan Berman, you mentioned, is the founder of Nug of Knowledge. And unfortunately, he's on the road. He couldn't be here with us, but you guys taped a little something. And so Let me get that going.
And let's point out that code.
The code?
The code,
10% off and support People for Liberty.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Dan Berman. I'm one of the founders of the Nug of Knowledge, and I've got Thomas Queter with me. Say hi, Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
So we are entrepreneurs, but we're also political in a way. He calls political entrepreneurs. I'm currently running for governor of Texas. I've run for president of the United States in the past. Thomas.
I ran for state senate here in New York last year, and I am already planning my next state level run for 2022.
We both like weed, and we both think it should be legal. So on both of our platforms, that's always been the case. We need to end the drug war and legalize cannabis. But because some states are kind of getting there, and we've got CBD products that are legal across the country, we were kind of like, well, what if we funded our campaigns by selling drugs? Of course, legal drugs, because we don't want to get into too much campaign trouble along the way. But so we created the Nug of Knowledge, and we also took a different approach because we know there's like this stigma of weed smokers are like, just burnout stoners that sit on the couch all day and do nothing. And we wanted to change that perspective because we know a lot of people use it for motivation. They use it for concentration. They use it for a mind stimulant. They use it for artistic creativity. There's so many positive things you can do with it. And of course, if you smoke the right strains or consume the right strains, it can actually make you more productive and more thoughtful. So we kind of wanted to change the stigma with that. And so gave birth to the Nug of Knowledge.
That's a very good point about strains, though. When you really get into it, you can very precisely hone in on your problems by researching your strains and talking to people who know which strains work best for that. And of course, there's always a little bit of a trial and error when you're trying it on new strains.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two main strains. So I guess we can talk a little bit about this. There's the indica and the sativa, and then of course there's hybrids. And the main with the indica is that it's kind of they compare them to uppers and downers. The indica is more of a downer. It'll make you a little bit more tired, a little bit more relaxed. Into couch, right? And sativa is more of like an upper. It gives you a little bit more energy. Now, of course, there's so many different varieties, and then you also have terpenes, which Thomas can explain those better than I can. But they're all just a complete different combination of the ingredients that go into the cannabis that have completely different effects. And some are better for pain, some are better for insomnia. All the different medical ailments that people have that they use them for. Some of them are better for creativity. Some of them clear your mind a little bit better. Some of them give you more euphoria and all these other things.
Terpenes are important because there's such a wide range, and they have such niche abilities. Some have been proven to fight cancer or slow cancer. Some have been proven to directly reduce inflammation, and most of them are antimicrobial, actually. So it's a very nuanced spectrum that we're looking at here, and there's a lot of opportunity for our species to use this as medicine and replace a lot of pharmaceuticals.
Another interesting one too is the THC Delta 8, which is new. So we're used to just referring to THC as just THC, but there's actually the THC that most of the government is against is a very specific chemical called THC Delta 9. And there's a new chemical that's THC Delta 8, and this is actually created. It's a process. You take the CBD and you run it through a process, and you create THC Delta 8 out of it. And what's great about this is it does give you, some people are saying, a little bit of a euphoric feeling, but it's not so much. It's not so much as strong as the THC Delta 9.
So to that note, if I can. I do want to chime in. And, we are doing this for people's health, and we're doing this for people's wellness. And if you are going to imbibe in Delta 8 THC, I would recommend not doing so while driving or operating heavy machinery or welding atop a framework of a building, people below you. These are things you do not want to be inebriated for. So while Delta 8 is legal and you can use it, you still have to be smart, just like with anything else. Largely, these will not inebriate you to a degree that is significant. But you should be cautious with anything. The doctor would tell you that about any prescription he gives you, or she.
Right. Yeah, that's a really important point. So, even though these things don't get you high, there's a very important consideration of, if you're required to take a drug test, whether it's for work, whether it's because you're on probation or anything like that. It's, even though a lot of these have, so the regulation is it has to be less than 0.3% THC in the product, but of course that is still THC. It's a very small amount, and depending on the tests, and some people say that they drink a lot of water and it dilutes it and it helps them pass the test. Other people have just said they don't do anything, they still pass the test. It's going to vary. Some tests are more sensitive than others. So so all these things are important considerations. So just because it's legal cannabis doesn't mean you're going to pass a drug test. That's something very important to take into consideration. Absolutely. So one of the things I want to talk about is our rights, because I know there's a lot of people out there that they got into the cannabis, and it's it is a really good reason to legalize, and that's all the health benefits. There's so many health benefits from cannabis, CBD, THC, and those are amazing. But the reality is none of that matters. When the government comes along and says, hey, we're trying to protect your own health and safety, which is what they claim to be doing by prohibiting cannabis, we need to say, like, okay, yeah, well, hold on a second. There might be all these health benefits, which is great, but the reality is you don't have the constitutional authority, you don't have the moral authority, and you don't have the right to tell me what I can or can't put into my own body. In the Declaration of Independence, which is referred to in law as, even though it's technically not law, it's referred to in law as law, that all men are created equal. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are our natural rights.
And cannabis.
And cannabis. And that's exactly right, because, if this is how you pursue happiness, then why can't you consume cannabis? If you go to somebody and you say, hey, I have a right to possess, to grow, to consume cannabis, to get high if I want to, as long as I'm not bothering anybody else, they're going to say, well, where is that in the Constitution? Well, you point to the 9th Amendment. The 9th Amendment says you have lots and lots and lots of rights that we haven't listed out in the Constitution. And just because we haven't listed those rights out does not mean that those rights can be infringed upon. Those rights also need to be protected. And those rights, again, you go back to the Declaration of Independence, are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what is liberty if you can't grow and consume your own cannabis? What is pursuit of happiness if you can't consume what makes you happy?
I completely agree, and that kind of leads us into the other things that the Nug of Knowledge is doing. A certain percentage of our proceeds goes to supporting organizations who obviously are looking to make cannabis more mainstream, more legal across the nation. And my personal favorite, I'm a disabilities advocate. I've run into so many people who have gotten themselves off of one of those duffel bags full of different opiates just by using cannabis. We have a compassionate use program that we're calling Nugs and Hugs. And that's where veterans, people with disabilities, anybody who can't afford their cannabis can sign up. And out of that fund, we will provide some free products to help them. Personally, it helps me. I do want to take a moment and point out that I was 10 years old the first time a doctor recommended cannabis to me. It was perfectly illegal in every which way in 1993. And yet the doctor pulled me aside, 10-year-old me, and said, you should try cannabis. And, he said that because I had a problem with opiates. They had prescribed me an opiate when I was 8 that caused an overdose situation and wasn't too fun for me. And it's interesting that a doctor would take that risk. I mean, he's putting his livelihood, his medical license at risk to tell this 10-year-old kid to use weed. Think about that for a minute, right? How strongly must he have felt about that? And I think this progression of legalization and decriminalization that we're seeing across the country is great. And that's what we're doing here at Knowledge is trying to expand. We want to make more people see it as acceptable. We want to make more people give it a shot. And by having the products, the flower that is not loaded with THC, those who are in positions in which they might not want that THC can try the other benefits of CBD, CBN, CBG, and terpenes. And those are all extremely important.
So one more thing we want to talk about is the affiliate program. So this is actually a community oriented thing. I mean, you already see that we're trying to help the community by legalizing cannabis. A lot of vendors of cannabis products are actually happy that you have regulations in place to prevent competition, because that means they're the only people in town who get to sell it. We want to make it legal. We want people to be able to grow it in their own backyard and consume it for themselves. But we also want to give back to the community and allow anybody in any community to become a part of this. So what we're actually doing is we have an affiliate program. Anyone can sign up, and you can basically become your local nug dealer, and you can sell nugs to your friends and family. You can sell nugs online. You never have to touch the product. We joke around. We say it's kind of like Mary Kay, but it's Mary J. But it's not one of these things where it takes a big investment to get in. You don't have to buy a bunch of product. You don't have to pay. It's not a pyramid scam where you have to like pay and the money just goes up the pyramid. This is really just, you become an affiliate, you help us refer people who are interested in the product, and every time they purchase for the rest of their life, once they're your customer for the rest of their life, anything they purchase from us, you get a percentage from that. So that helps the community grow, especially right now. I know it's difficult because of COVID lockdowns and a lot of people are struggling for cash. This is a way to help us distribute the money, share the wealth within our community. And of course, all of this money, we're sharing this with affiliates. We're also sharing it with organizations that are helping to legalize cannabis. So really, this is one of the most ethical business models I've ever seen, because most of the money that comes in, it's basically going right back out to very strategic places, the people who are helping us, the people who want to help the community, the people who want to change the world and make a better place. And this is really an amazing structure, and I hope we can see some other business models follow this in the future.
The other thing that I like about this is that it's mail order. You can receive this all through the mail. When it comes to, say, when they first legalized medical marijuana in New York, right? I hate calling it marijuana, let's call it cannabis. When we first legalized medical cannabis in New York, you had to go to certain dispensaries, but there were not very many. There were few and far between. And the people who need the cannabis most don't travel well. They happen to be disabled or elderly. And to expect someone to drive 1, 2, 3, or 4 hours to get their cannabis is ridiculous. And so one of the advantageous aspects of 50-state legal products is that we can mail them directly to the consumer.
I guess there's nothing else left to say other than if you head over to nugofknowledge.com, you can find all these great products. You can learn more about us. And of course, if you use the code PFL, as in People for Liberty, we'll actually give you 10% off your first order today. And you're also going to be helping out People for Liberty if you make that purchase. So we're already giving back to the community. And,
I just want to leave off. Most people should probably smoke cannabis every day. You knew where I was going, right?
Smoke weed every day.
You're muted.
Thank you.
I'm muted. That's one of the things that is a risk. I had to get the water bottle. That was awesome, Thomas. Thanks so much for talking about Nug. And one of the things that Nug is doing is that they are helping out in other groups. And so, we have one of the most important groups around. We are privileged to have Jen Michelle Pedini with us. They are the development director for the National Organization, the Reform of Marijuana Laws we talked about earlier, NORML. And they also serve as the executive director of the state chapter in Virginia, and Virginia has got some pretty exciting news. So, JM, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm in Maryland. I know what's going on, but can you talk a little bit about and Holly's in Virginia.
I'm in Virginia, and JM, you are my most excited. Well, I'm the most excited to talk to you and hear what you have to say.
So for the rest of the country, tell us about your really good news.
Yeah, Virginia just became the first state in the South to legalize cannabis for adult use.
And that's awesome. When you say adult use,
Mm-hmm.
we can grow. You guys can grow. I might be renting a little lot in Holly's yard. How much?
So adults 21 and older, beginning July 1st of this year, will be able to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis in public.
Wow.
And will be able to cultivate up to 4 plants per household for personal use.
That's a pretty good amount for people who haven't done it before. I may pop up my my plants that I was growing in Massachusetts. It's one of my favorite pictures. 4 plants is more than you think, and especially in a state like Virginia, where it's a mild climate, you can grow outdoors a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and originally the administration had proposed, let's keep in mind, these bills were put forth by Governor Northam.
Yeah.
And originally the administration had proposed a limit of 2 mature and 2 immature plants per household. Fortunately, they took our suggested amendment to just make it 4 and not worry about how mature the plants were.
Oh, that's an awesome thing. Because go ahead, Holly.
Yeah. So, JM, another thing that I would love to highlight that Normal did here, the original date was not 2021. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the administration had also proposed that the date of legalization be tied to the date that retail sales can begin. Really, there was no need for this, and so we were, from the minute these bills were introduced, we had provided to the bill patrons and to the administration that there was no need to marry legalization to the date of legal retail sales, and proposed that we disconnect those and allow legalization to take place on July 1st. And while the Senate had accepted that, the House had instead maintained what the administration's position was. And ultimately, we had to take this proposal to the administration and say, listen, this is really what Virginians want. They want legalization to take effect this year, and Virginians ought not be criminalized for something that's going to be explicitly legal under state law in just a few years. And fortunately, Governor Northam agreed. I have no doubt that the nearly 9,000 emails Virginians sent in support of this measure were influential.
So there's a whole can of stuff there. But the number one thing is, let's talk about the inspiration that you guys are giving to the other southern states right now who are wondering, how do we do this? What did you guys do? How did you crack this nut?
So wherever you are, whatever state you're in, whatever territory you're in, there is a prescriptive path through which policy change happens in your state. And that's exactly what we've applied here. There's a way that policy changes in Virginia, and we simply observed that and applied it to cannabis policy. And we did a very, very much a belt and suspenders method here. Not only does Virginia like to do a study before taking any big policy steps, and so we had that done as well. We also said, let's convene a work group as well. So Governor Northam had a number of secretaries convene a legislative work group to discuss cannabis policy and what it might look like under legalization. And we were thoughtful in what the parameters of the study and the work group would be, and that it wouldn't be should Virginia legalize cannabis, but how should Virginia legalize cannabis, and how can it do so in an equitable manner, and how can it do so in a way that centers both consumer safety and restorative justice. And so we were very intentional in what we needed to take a look at prior to ever coming into the legislative session in putting forth a really robust and comprehensive piece of legislation to legalize and regulate the responsible use of cannabis for adults in Virginia. And it was simply that methodical, putting one foot in front of the other, following the path that's prescribed in Virginia, and taking those small wins before. You can't just show up and say, I want everything now and I want it today, because you're not going to get it. You have to be willing to say, okay, this is a good first start.
So one of the things that you've hit on there is a phrase that we haven't talked about enough, restorative justice. And you guys built that in to your legislation, right?
Yes, absolutely. So Virginia simultaneously was exploring through study how to implement an expungement model here in Virginia. Right now, you can only get a past record expunged if you're found not guilty or the charge is dismissed. And so Virginia also passed legislation this session that will create an automatic expungement process, as well as a petition-based expungement process for a number of previous offenses, and some of those include marijuana offenses. Last year in our decriminalization legislation, we had misdemeanor marijuana possession records sealed. And this year with our legalization legislation, we will have misdemeanor possession with intent to distribute marijuana records automatically sealed. And so these things are taking place prior to that automatic expungement process even being constructed and implemented. Because honestly, we still have computers in some municipalities running on DOS here in Virginia.
But that's so meaningful, and it's something that people don't talk about. And it really is, you know, the war on drugs was a war on the American people. And there's so many people that were damaged. And I am so appreciative for you guys setting out this map, because a lot of places, they're not talking about that, right? A lot of places have changed and legalized, and they're all about the money, but they're not about fixing the damage that the government did in the first place by making people, I'm going off here, I'm sorry.
No, it's the legalization has to be about people. It can't just be about how to make money. That's great, but you've got to think about the people at some point.
That's it. Go ahead, Holly.
So JM, I mean, you guys, NORML's had this huge victory in Virginia, but you're also, as we mentioned previously, the development director for NORML nationally. How do you operate in taking these victories in Virginia and translate it to your national work?
So one of my responsibilities as the development director is to oversee NORML's global affiliate chapter network. So every week we have multiple strategy sessions where I share the best practices that we have learned with our chapters around the world, as well as invite other experts and other chapter leaders to share their expertise as well. So we're really, taking a global look at how we can be more effective in our advocacy, and honestly, just to remind folks that it's okay not for it to be perfect. You have to take those wins where you can get them. And most importantly, you have to be dedicated to continuing the work. You take that win and it's not perfect, and that's okay, because you're going to come back next year and you're going to make it better.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the global perspective as well as the national perspective. If you were sort of as national development director going to say which state is next, who do you think? I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
oh my goodness. Well, we are watching a number of states and what we think might be next. There's a whole host of states that have actions pending, both as it relates to adult use and medical use. And so who's going to be next? Whew, that's a great question. I think that when it comes to medical, we've got, we have Alabama, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas is making some headway, and North Carolina. And then when we're looking at adult use, we've got Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island. maybe Minnesota and Pennsylvania.
I mean, Rhode Island is essentially Massachusetts, so it's crazy that they don't have adult use yet. Let me ask you a quick question too. Does Normal have, you talked about the fact that there's a path. Do you have a preferred thing, whether decrim comes through legislative or through a ballot initiative?
No, and I think that we're starting to see that shift where the states that have run it through ballot initiative, we haven't run out of them, but we've run through a lot of them. And so now you're beginning to see more states legalize through the legislative process or decriminalize the legislative process.
And then one of the other things that we talked about earlier is that, there's a lot of places that have not implemented decrim. Nobody's getting arrested anymore, but there's a lot of regulations, a lot of arduous conditions that are preventing the people, that there is no restorative justice. The people who were the victims of the drug war are not allowed to own cannabis stores, are not allowed to, see the final benefit of this. Is that something that Normal's involved in as well?
It is, and Virginia is a perfect example of that. We ensured that the legislation here in Virginia does not prohibit those with low-level offenses from participating in the new emerging regulated marketplace, be it for medical or for adult use.
That's awesome. I am grateful for the work that Normal has done over the years. We were talking about this earlier. You guys are founded in the early 70s, right?
1970. We are celebrating 50 years of working to reform marijuana laws.
That's amazing. And I must imagine that there are people, active who've been there almost the whole 50 years, if not the whole 50 years.
Absolutely. My colleague at Normal is Keith Stroup, the founder of Normal and Virginia resident. Keith is our legal counsel at Normal, and it's really great to go to work with him every day and learn exactly what it was like when Normal first started. He has an incredible series on the Normal website, A Founder Looks at 50. If you want to take a stroll down memory lane, it's incredible.
All right, I'm going to go there. I am looking forward to that. JM, thank you so much for joining us. 420, it's a day of celebration. It's a day of reflection. And I think going forward, it's going to be a day where a lot of people talk about, look, this was a day that is as important to liberty in the United States as a lot of other days that we're going to point to. You guys had a huge part with that.
It's a day of action, Dan. It really is a day of action.
That's probably the best way to put it.
Or inaction, depending on how far along your 420 is.
Well, and so that's
we hope it's a day of action, and Normal makes it so easy for you to engage in action from wherever you are. We have a complete toolkit for you to leverage on 420. Lots of content for you to share to help encourage people to contact their lawmakers in support of some really common sense reforms.
That's awesome. A lot more common sense will make this a lot better. Thank you again, JM. Normal.org/toolkit is the place to go. And I look forward to meeting you in person and thanking you guys for this amazing work that you've done.
Thanks so much, Dan and Holly, for having us.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
All right. So, the development director for Normal on our show.
JM is so great. They have done such amazing work in Virginia and nationally, Dan. It's fantastic.
It is. And I tell you that when I first moved down here, one of my biggest losses, and I'm not an enormous cannabis consumer, but to not be able to grow all that other stuff. And then it was so far away. And now that Virginia, 4 plants, all that stuff, it's exciting. One of the interesting things about it, of course, is that we have we've talked about their various aspects of the industry. We're going to bring on somebody who is in the process of trying to become a cannabis entrepreneur.
Yeah, actually a small business cannabis shop applicant in Massachusetts.
Right. And full disclosure, friend of mine, Warren Lynch. Warren, thanks so much for coming on the broadcast.
Hello, can you hear me? Whoa.
We can hear you. You're a little loud, but you're good at that distance.
Okay, is this better?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
I recommend a book. I don't want you to have to hold the phone for for 15 minutes while we're talking. But whatever works for you is good. So tell us a little bit about where you are and where you are trying to open up a cannabis shop.
So I'm in Malden, Massachusetts, and we're a suburb of Boston, right next to Cambridge and Somerville. We're a working class suburb with low, moderate income residents, and we voted majority for cannabis. And the majority of our city council supports cannabis, but we have some big money interests and small minority interests that don't represent the larger community, throwing roadblocks in our way all over the place. And something you'd be interested in, Dan, about how those lines, they were super long at first and then they went away. Part of that is because of free market forces, but part of it is something that libertarians and progressives agree on, which is we don't like when a few big businesses take over the lawmaking process and capture the government regulation for themselves at the expense of the consumer and at the expense of the small business, which is what's happening in Massachusetts in a big way.
It goes to a great point, because Massachusetts, although it has legalized adult use, there is actually still a significant black market for cannabis in Massachusetts, right?
Right, and the black market, and these this business cartel called the CDA, Commonwealth Dispensary Association, and other possible associations of these these few medical licenses that were allowed to operate in the beginning because they were supposedly nonprofits, have taken over the regulation process of themselves and kept everyone else out of the market. And they were mandated to have low potency at first, so they developed growing techniques that for low potency weed. And so they when it became legal for recreational, and they got to be first in line by law, they flooded the market with this low potency weed, and so everyone went back to the black market because that's where the decent weed that doesn't make you cough, isn't saturated with mold, isn't dunked in peroxide, isn't dunked in hydrochloric acid to kill mold, which spores probably still exist on it. I mean, it's tested for mold, whether there's live mold on it, but there's still a funk and soapy, nasty smell, and people go right back to the black market. And so if small businesses were allowed to compete with these people, there would be free market competition, and we could sell some decent weed and people would buy it.
So Warren, we're talking about free market competition, but I also want to address something that the cannabis industry isn't just for social use. There's also actual medical purposes, and a lot of those purposes require, right, a higher quality and a higher THC. So would you say in your experience that the government overregulation of this industry is actually hurting those who need the medicinal marijuana?
Yeah, it was all based on fake science saying that lower potency cannabis would be better for medical patients somehow, when the research shows. My mom, her life was extended by 9 months during cancer because of Rick Simpson oil, which she used, which requires high potency THC in order to manufacture it. And that was, when the lawmakers make that illegal for supposedly medical purposes, they're not talking about real medical purposes.
Absolutely. They're talking about government interest, and they're talking about government interest and corporation interest.
When somebody's corporate money interest is writing the laws against the consumer benefit. It's not fair.
And in many ways, cannabis is a crop that, if there weren't this regulation, is actually a nightmare for big cannabis because it's relatively easy to grow, right? It's easy to share, that sort of thing. And so they really are threatened by the small organic grower, but also you, an independent storefront. And let's get into that a little bit. You actually applied. Go ahead, Warren.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Oregon, the small growers drove all the big guys out of business.
Right.
The big business took over at first, and they had the whole market to themselves. And then, they can't grow decent cannabis because they don't love the plant. The small local person, just like local farms, they can grow something, or, a big business who paid enough attention to quality, maybe they could, but it turned out Benevolent Growers of Oregon, an association of small businesses, totally drove the big farms out of business. And there were all these stalks of dead plants and gigantic fields, but business stayed alive, and the consumer decided what kind of cannabis they wanted, and that was the high quality cannabis. Despite people trying to erase that from the market, which still is happening in Massachusetts, and that's about to change because a couple of friends of mine, the D'Souza family, for example, they just started a small business cannabis grow recently, finally, 3 years after we were legalized, and they should be on the market soon with their high quality cannabis, and we hope to carry it in our shop, and we'll be growing some of our own, and we're about to see some big changes in Massachusetts, and hopefully libertarians and progressives will both like them.
You mentioned Oregon, and for people who aren't aware, the Oregon cannabis market is glutted, right? They have plenty, which is where we'd want things to be if we had an honest system, because the same thing is true for almost every other agricultural product. You never hear of demand outstripping supply. Right. And you, let's talk a little bit about you trying to get into the business, because you actually applied to open up a store, right?
Yeah, we started the process of almost 3 years ago now, and we're still at the city level, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we're seeing good signs at the city level. But there are several more steps ahead of us, and our mutual friend Mike Crawford was telling me he knows half a dozen people like me who've been in this process for years and just wiped out their entire life savings, and now they're back to working minimum wage jobs, totally having failed at small business just because they were overregulated out of existence.
Which is crazy, because if you wanted to sell tomatoes, that wouldn't be a problem. And for the people who aren't familiar with Massachusetts, the North End, they have a tomato addiction problem. Okay, tomatoes consumed all over the place.
Yeah, if you wanted to sell opioids or alcohol, it's much less of a problem to open your liquor store or your opioid business, your opioid delivery business, than it is for a much safer, healthier, less addictive product.
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense.
So, Warren, do you think that this is actually deterring small business from opening?
Yes. Oh, definitely. There are all kinds of because these big medical places, which they were started as nonprofits, but one of them just went public for $1.9 billion. Because of them being able to write the laws so that only they were able to continue. All kinds of small businesses like me have been kept from getting licensed. Not stopped officially, but we get delayed out of existence. We're paying rent on our locations, endlessly trying to pass these regulations. They this Michael DeNault guy, right? I'm sure he's a nice guy, but the government has mandated that we all pay the same amount of insurance, the big businesses and the small. And so you have to have $250,000 of insurance. That's that's a big struggle for a small business. And we
So
have
it
all kinds
sounds
of
like
other
it's
barriers in
not
the state.
just
Zoning laws.
regulation, but over regulation is coming in every facet of the industry.
Right.
Yeah, it's we're the most heavily regulated cannabis state in the whole country right now, and you can see that in the market. That's why the cannabis you can get in a dispensary is crap. You can get it in 80 million different dispensaries, and they have all these flashy displays, and you pick up your cannabis and it looks beautiful. Then you smoke it and you cough your lungs out and you go right back to the black market.
That's harmful for people that,
Yeah.
especially for people that need cannabis, people that have actual medical need for it. That hurts people. That's so sad to me. I'm so sorry, Warren.
Yeah, the legal market is supposed to keep people safer, hopefully, by having testing for heavy metals and molds and things, that's supposed to help the consumer, and I'm sure it will once, there's enough competition in the market that, you can also sell weed that doesn't make people cough and not get them high, and you have to smoke 10 times as much of it as your black market weed that you don't know what has in it. It might have heavy metals, or who knows.
Do you think that there's a hope for a solution for Massachusetts? Is there anything on the horizon legislatively or anything
yeah,
else?
we have a tremendous activist coalition in Massachusetts. That's why we got legalized so early. Progressives and libertarians seem very willing to work together on cannabis here, and it's becoming more and more of an issue that people are talking about. And the Cannabis Control Commission has been discussing it, and then we have social equity licenses in Somerville, Malden, Cambridge, and some other towns where they have to write laws to make it possible again for the small business to open up, which they might not even have needed this social equity laws if they didn't have other laws in place stopping us. But hope there's definitely some promise in that arena.
Dan,
Well,
hopefully.
we should have Warren and Michael back on something like weeding out businesses.
Terrible pun, but yes.
Oh, that was so good. Come on.
All right, it was pretty good. 420 is about puns, if nothing else. But it's a day in activism and day of celebration. Warren Lynch, thank you so much. Thanks for what you're trying to get done in Malden, because it's a service. It's not just a business. People rely on being able to get quality cannabis at prices that are affordable. And it's a shame that the people of Massachusetts are being denied that. Hopefully when Rhode Island legalizes, that'll make Massachusetts wake up a little bit.
Well, hear, and thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. Good to talk to you again. So, Holly, we are coming to the end of the 420, but I have to ask you
of the podcast.
Of the podcast, right? Not the end of 420. Well, so it's an important thing. Did you put out cookies and milk last night?
I didn't, but I did see some hoof prints in my house.
Well, that's because it's a critical thing, because our next guest is a guy that if you put out milk and cookies on April 19th, something magical will appear. And with that, let me introduce the magical man himself, my friend Vermin Supreme. Hey, Vermin, how's it going?
All righty, ponies. Are you ready? How about you, pony? Are you ready? Uh-huh. And how about you, pony? Are you also ready? Oh, I thought you might be. All righty, ponies. Let's go. Get up, ponies. Roop, 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 roop. Faster, 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 faster. Roop, roop, boop, 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 roop, boop, 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 roop, boop, 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 boop. Whoa, ponies. Now kiss. Mwah, mwah.
We certainly approve of that, everything about it. And I can't help but noticing you're wearing an exceptional shirt, Vermin.
Oh, thank you indeed. I'm yes, I am. This is my classic dare to keep kids off drugs. And It's genuine. It's certainly worked in my case. Yes, I don't do drugs no more. Vermin doesn't need any drugs anymore. It's true. They did their job. Happy bicycle day. Happy belated bicycle day, of course.
It is. It's an important day. I'm going to tell a little tale out of school. The first time that Vermin and I sparked up together was in Orlando. That looks exceptional. It's a giant jar. And I was there and I wasn't planning on doing anything important. And then all of a sudden stuff happened and I had to be super political. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to be very responsible. I'm going to go out here. And there's this group of circle people outside. I end up sitting next to the amazing Vermin, who at this point in time, like already famous, big guy in my mind. We had been on a couple of radio shows together and Vermin passes me. You have to call it just the very little bit. And I'm like, I haven't smoked in 15 years, but this is a once an opportunity. So small little hit and I pass it back. 2 hours later, I am by myself out by the pool. I don't know what happened. I was trying to be super responsible, but I always remember that moment. And I remember the fact that sort of sense of community, right? You don't even think twice about passing a joint to somebody else, somebody who you just met.
Yes, well, that is, of course, one of the beautiful things about stoner culture. It's accessibility and it's the sharing aspect and the communal aspect of it. And, it's sharing is caring. Now, in this day and age, of course, you got to be a little more careful and more thinking about it. Like when you hear coughing, it might not just be somebody smoking weed, if you know what I mean.
It's a very good point, but that culture is a really important thing. And in many ways, there's not many aspects of our culture that we can look to and say, really, this is the thing that you can do. And everybody's going to be happy to get together and do it together. But that's generally true when people sit around and connect with cannabis.
Indeed.
It's a happier time.
Dan, that's true. But also you don't really have to have a big conversation about it.
Right.
It's ingrained in the culture of cannabis. There's no narrative that has to exist. You don't have to elaborate on it. It happens so naturally because of, I think,
that's
the history
true.
of cannabis.
But people like to talk about it these days. They have this bud and that bud and this THC and that sativa and that indica. There are a lot of connoisseurs, and I won't say snobs, but I'll say snobs. But yeah. So let's smoke, everybody. I'd like to show off my glassware. This is my glass Vermin pipe. It is produced by Anthony Bradbury, and it's going to be soon available on our merch site. You see, the weed goes in my belly. Okay, right?
Awesome.
And then you like the feet. The feet is the carburetor.
Yep.
And the boot is the stem, so you can suck on my boot. Just like in real life.
Hey, I'm hoping we can get a little example here.
Okay. Here we go, everybody.
Yep.
We got 'em.
It's outstanding. Happy 420, everybody. Let's see it. Oh, that's a good looking puff there, right? And look, it's Vermin's face on the cover.
Oh, yeah.
And it's lit up.
And I got weed in my belly. And I got the fire in my belly and the weed in my belly.
This is awesome. This is a really good idea. And so then, of course, the question becomes is that, when the idea of the boot first came to you, did you think to yourself, someday there's going to be a pipe with a boot so that people can lick the boot and participate?
That I did not think that. I did not anticipate. Of course, obviously, when I stuck it on my head, it was just a quick, foolish little silly thing. But the response was so incredible, and people started demanding it, and now it's surgically attached to my skull.
Oh, it's awesome.
For safety. Gorilla Glue for safety.
For safety.
It is lined with tinfoil.
That's good. It's required these days. So, I'm going to drop back a little bit and talk about cannabis culture. And in many ways, you're an ambassador for an idea that the country is just warming up to. And, it's a little bit bigger than cannabis. It's sort of the whole Vermin Supreme movement. But I would have to imagine that cannabis plays
Am
an
I
important
missing
part of that.
a movement, you say?
Yes.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
Well, but it is, right? I mean, we have this idea that culture is shifted by great ideas and people who can represent them. And you are representing this great idea.
Yes, at one point, believe it or not, I was considered an extremist, if you will, an outlier. But strangely, it happens that I became more mainstream, maybe, or at least, part of what I've been presenting, of course, is the idea that you should let your freak flag fly. And I think that's a very wonderful part of the stoner culture. And of course, it was back to Bicycle Day 419 yesterday. LSD was certainly an extremely informative experience for me as a young person. It did, in fact, rewire my neurotransmitters to the point where I could freely understand how interdimensional things are and how perception versus reality and how you can be stepping into one and out of the other very fluidly. And ultimately, it did, in fact, allow me to become a person that would have a boot on my head and not be afraid to talk, nonlinear, ridiculous things in order to get my point across.
Well, you talk about the idea of, there was a point in time in which you were considered an extremist, but you're advocating for this idea of everybody should let their freak flag fly. Do you sometimes think to yourself, you know what? I have been out freaked by the mainstream because they're pushing this really freaky stuff at this point in time.
Well, mainstream, the mainstream culture will eat itself. If there's this opening, if something is happening, it will be co-opted, if at all possible. If people can somehow turn a idea or the idea of an idea into a commodity, they will certainly do just that. So it's not surprising. Of course, I guess I've been a little lucky in that I have not been consumed by the media industrial complex over the years, because ultimately that could have been one path.
You are their type.
Yes. Right. In 2008, I was actually at NBC Rockefeller Center taking a meeting with a VP of development, and went swimmingly, went nowhere. But that was fine. It was good. And it was great that it happened early on. So I got that out of the way and out of my mind.
So in that vein, seeing this sort of, we're celebrating 420, and you and I went to...
He said the magic word, 420, everybody.
You and I have been to a lot of freedom rallies down on the Boston Common together, usually done in the fall. But as you see this change and, more and more states are legalizing, do you find that the message resonates any less? The pipe is awesome.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to hold it together the whole podcast. And Vermin, your pipe has done me in. That is hands down one of the best things I think I've seen today.
Thank you. I'm so glad it has brought you joy.
I love it.
For sure.
Sorry, Dan.
The legalization movement has been great. I remember the first time that myself and my wife Becky, we were driving out west, and we were in Oregon, and it was when weed became legal there. And just the weight that was lifted from one psychically. You're driving down the road, and generally it's like, holy shit, I'm holding. The cops could jack me up. It could turn into a stop and all this bullshit. But when we found ourselves just driving in Oregon, it's like it's legal, and we're holding, and we got the weed, and it's like, cool, we're smoking weed and shit. And you just, oh, look, there's a cop, and it's like no big deal. It still gives you a little jolt now and again, but because they will kill you if you're not careful. But the weed is, of course, one less pretext that they have to fuck with you.
And that's, one of the big deals. And obviously this is a big day for justice, and some of the things that have happened around the country with the Chauvin trial, talking about legalization and how it really does free people. That spirit of being free, do you find that when people get it, that it becomes contagious and they want more and more freedom?
I certainly hope so. Look at Oregon. Oregon just legalized all of the drugs, and so now possession of small amounts of any substance is not going to get you thrown in the slammer. It's not a pretext to take away your freedom to get jacked up by a cop. And so that right there is just it's like, okay, what's the next stupid law that we can get out of the way? But obviously, and I do look very much forward. I haven't heard a lot of stories from Oregon about the new life on the ground for people who want to use whatever drugs they want to use. I think hopefully it will play out like Portugal, where just the easy access and the wipes out the black market essentially, and makes it easy and legal, and addiction goes down, and responsible use goes up. So there's that.
Let me ask you one sort of last larger political question. As a guy who's seen the battle be won in Massachusetts and seen the changes over the last 40 years.
I grew this in my backyard. Thank you, Massachusetts.
It's funny because we've been talking about that, and Massachusetts in many ways, it's awesome. I'm a former Massachusetts resident, but there is still a black market in Massachusetts because the regulations of what's going on and make it so that the stuff that they're selling in the stores aren't great. But
well, you know what I always say, black markets are free markets.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I am one of the things that I always loved in Massachusetts was we had this idea from the very beginning, overgrow and share, so that we always grew more and then would just clone and give it away and give it away.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing where it's like super totally legal and encouraged. You can give away weed here. You can't sell it, but you can give it away. And what a wonderful suggestion from the state that we can make gifts of it to anybody and everybody.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the best statement about 420, about cannabis, where it's gone, is that, it's one of those things that people are happy to enrich their neighbors.
Yep.
If I can give this to you and it makes your life better, please let me do it.
Sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring.
Cannabinoid receptors activated.
Well, that's perfect. I want to let you fire that up. And then I'm hoping that you can tell me when and where I will be able to buy a pipe like that.
I'm going to say verminsupreme.com is probably your best bet. There might be a list to be getting on because, of course, they are being personally manufactured by Anthony. He's a one-person glass point operation, but he's been making these. He also has like glass pens. If you like to write with a pen that looks like me made out of glass, you can do that. Or he just made a Vermin Supreme glass butt plug. And I just saw a picture of it. It's pretty amazing. It's smooth. It's the right shape. It has it has like the Vermin Supreme head and boot on it. And
I'm worried I will confuse it with a pipe, though.
Yeah, it's really important you don't mix those up, Dan. You really got to make sure they're two different things.
That's good stuff. Vermin, I know that this is a very busy day for you. You still have to deliver to boys and girls around the world. Thank you for taking
Very true. Yes, this evening I'll be on the Muddied Waters with Spike, of course, Spike and Matt. And I believe that also Derek from Post Political Podcast with Chrissy will be appearing with us in some mad, crazy cross promotional operation that we got going on. And of course, we didn't even get to talk about how much Jo Jorgensen loves the edibles. I was going to tell the anecdote about how me and Joe and Jacob were like hanging out on Adam Kokesh's bus, and we got so freaking stoned. Oh my God. I could barely keep up with him. Jacob Hornberger is a freaking weed smoking demon, and like I say,
you had
Joe's
Trump
love
too,
of
right?
Edibles are simply legendary on the
and
campus.
you smoked Trump out as well, right?
Indeed. Oh yes. Wherever I go, I am there.
That's awesome. Vermin, thank you so much. We appreciate you having you on the show. We are going to,
and remember, there are two types of people on this planet. Those that love ponies and those that will not survive the transition times. Because The road to Phototopia will not be easy. No, no, no. It's going to be hardships. Not all of us are going to make it. There will be sacrifices, human sacrifices. But let me assure you this, the road to Phototopia will be paved with the glitter-encrusted skulls of our vanquished enemies. Together, we are going to ride our ponies into a zombie-powered future. And that is why, now, more than ever, you must ask yourself, what are you going to name your pony? And if you hire me at cameo.com/Vermin Supreme, that's exactly what you get for your friends.
That's awesome. Cameo.com. Get Vermin to talk to your friends about the upcoming Ponotopia.
Yes.
Thanks again, Vermin.
All right. Remember, friends, butt plugs coming soon.
All right. Let's bring back in Tom. I think it's unfair to bring you in after that.
Yeah, that's tough to follow.
How do you follow a Vermin Supreme butt plug? I mean,
yeah. Well, hopefully with an enema. Sorry. I couldn't resist. That was too easy. You can't set me up with a joke like that.
I've never heard a butt plug described as too easy, Dan. So
well, all right. That's a fair statement. This is where 420 becomes a different sort of holiday. So we've had a great show. I am really grateful to you, Holly. I'm grateful to you, Thomas and Nug of Knowledge, for helping us to get this out and to celebrate both the zany, the informative, and the holiday that 420 is. It's about shared.
You know, the guest you had on previous to Vermin, Warren, that was his name, correct?
Yeah, Warren.
Warren. He made some excellent points. I've had the medical grade from a dispensary, and he's right, it makes you cough. And there's one specific reason to that. Growers who know and care about their plants flush their plants. It means you use a pure water for several days before harvest. That removes all of the built-up nitrogen, which is harsh on your lungs, and it forces the plant to use that up at the end of the cycle. So you have less heavy chemicals in the plant, and that's what actually tends to make you smoke, let alone any ill-gotten additives they try to put in, if they do. The other thing that I would like to point out is that your neighbor cares about you a lot more than a corporation.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep, because a corporation is never going to give you free plants. They never will. I can tell you, even outside of cannabis, I've had neighbors give me basil and tomatoes and cannabis. The plants that we showed. I never got around to showing the picture, but the plants that we grew came from clones from a friend. And he's like, Dan, this is the easiest thing you will ever do. Put it in the ground. Try not to step on it.
If you can grow tomatoes, you can grow cannabis.
I think it's important, though, just like we mentioned previously, cannabis goes with community. And when you include corporations, then you become a customer. And when you transition from a community to a customer, I think that's when you start to see the regulations come in.
Right. And I actually enjoyed the conversation about corporations actually lobbying for the regulations. And I believe Warren was discussing that before. We see this in all markets.
Yep.
If corporations have the fiscal power over our government, they get to write the regulations. It keeps down their competition. And after some of that discussion earlier, I'm about ready to move to Oregon.
Well, it wouldn't be a bad place to go. I want to thank you, Thomas, for all you've done. Thanks for Nug of Knowledge. People should definitely go to nugofknowledge.com, buy anything there, put in the PFL code, and get 10% off right now, which is a good deal. And purchases made there go to a good cause. So thank you, Thomas. I want to thank my friend Holly for doing yeoman service on really relatively short notice.
Always happy, Dan. I think this is an important issue, an important topic, and I'm always going to advocate for liberty no matter what the case is, which I think this is a great segue to our final point.
It is. And so the final point is May 1st is the National Libertarian Day of Service. We talk about the culture, the community culture, sharing is caring. The liberty movement needs more of that. And so we just picked a day at random. Well, not entirely at random. It happens to be the first day of May. It happens to be Jo Jorgensen's birthday. And as it turns out, other people celebrated for other things. But for us, for liberty people, we're going to sell this an opportunity to be good to each other.
And Dan, does it have to be just on May 1st?
It doesn't have to be on May 1st. You can do any day you want because libertarians don't really care about calendars that much. Calendars are just, that's the man trying to hold you down. You can go to peopleforliberty.org/NLDOS, National Libertarian Day of Service. peopleforliberty.org/NLDOS. We will connect you with other people doing things on May 1st. It's a great way to get out, make the world better, meet people who are similarly minded, who want to make the world better.
Dan, we want to feature people too. We want to make sure that we're highlighting the good that people are doing in their community, highlighting what individuals are doing, and making sure that we can show exactly what our day of service looks like.
Yep. And it's an easy thing to do. So please, everybody, if 420, that community, that sense, that made you feel good, think about what it's going to feel like in 10 days, 12 days, when you're out there making the world a better place with fellow libertarians. And, if you happen to share something, an herb or something else while you're out there, that's okay, because that's what our spirit is all about. So thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Holly.
Thank you, Dan.
And we look forward to seeing all you guys again soon.